So I am very, very excited, and it is an honor to introduce our summit keynote speaker, Mr. Jorg Dietzel. Jorg is truly a renaissance man of the marketing and communications world. And originally from Germany, Jorg spent most of his career in Asia, leading agencies like DDB, BBDO, in both Europe and Asia. He also invented the Audi agency network, an early inspiration for the Network One, and then later moved on to the client side to become the head of global creative at the Audi HQ in Ingolstadt. I hope I'm not butchering that, but sorry if I butchered that. So Jorg's real love really is Asia, where he runs his own consultancy business and is now giving back to the industry as an educator at the Singapore Management University. So a little secret, he was in fact my university professor, and he was the one that introduced me to Julian, that gave me the opportunity today to be your MC and speaker. And during my university days, Jorg's advertising class actually was one of the 3 A's out of 35 courses that I had to do. I only scored 3 A's, so a very model student I was. And of the 3 fantastic A's that I got, one of them was Jorg's advertising class. So Jorg also has published multiple books, and his latest new book, The Next Big Asian Brands, will be the focus of his summit keynote today. So let's put our hands together and welcome Jorg.
Hello. Thank you, Ping, for the introduction. You do know you only got the A because you were tall, right? Because you stood out. I couldn't miss you. Okay. Thank you for the introduction, and Julian, thank you for the invite, and happy to see you all here this morning, bright and early. Yeah, what brings me here, and what am I doing here? It's not so much, yes, I'm going to talk about my latest book, but any of you who have written a book, if you're getting like 12% or 15%, you're not going to get rich from, unless you're kind of, somebody who sells millions. So that's not the point. The point is just to share some of the insights that developed while I was looking into this. So to backstep for a moment, where is this all coming from? So this is my background, and I was just thinking, as I was sitting there listening, have I ever worked for an independent agency? I did for my very first agency, which is a small agency, it probably doesn't exist anymore in Germany, like 100 years ago. And then when I came to Singapore in 2001, I worked for Beatty, which at the time was still an independent agency, but it was in the process of being sold to WPP, so there goes my independent agency credential. So then in 2005, I came back from Hong Kong. I decided I would start my own. What can I do on my own? I cannot do advertising because you need so many skill sets, but I can do branding because you need no skill set. Just need a bit of experience working with big clients, and that's what I've done. And I've been running this for a while. Yes, then there came a little detour to work on the client side, first in Korea and then in Germany. And then I came back and rejuvenated my brand consultancy, and also went back to teach, which is a lot of fun. And you meet interesting people. Like Ping and like somebody else that we will meet later on. So I wanted to talk about this, but before I talk about this, I need to talk about something else. Going back in time to basically the time when Ping was having elephants in her living room. Around that time, my previous book came out, and it was called Touch. And it was about the experience economy, because experiences are very happening. And so I was looking at which areas can brands develop experiences in. So personalization is one, brick and mortar is still one, I believe. But of course social, of course digital, of course, any other kind of fields that I was looking at. So this came out in March 2020, which is not a good time to launch a book, because the book came out, nobody noticed, we couldn't do a launch, and Singapore was locked down for 10 weeks, and so, okay, that was it, fine. But that made me think now that, this is out there, and pandemic is happening, what can I do during the pandemic? So I was still teaching, but I was teaching online. And I think Lead and you were in my online class, right? Which was, okay, but not the real deal, right? Because you cannot read body language and all of that. You just see a kind of little tiny face, and so it's not perfect. But anyway, that was still going on. And then I was thinking, oh, I can write another book. What can I write about? Okay, I can write about. Oh, I have a COVID slide. Beautiful, right? So I can write about brands, because that's what I know a few things about, and not just any kind of brand, but the kind of up-and-coming brands, and how were they impacted by the pandemic. Because obviously, we didn't know at the time how long it was going to last, but obviously it was going to have an impact, right? And it was going to change the world. Maybe not as much as we thought initially, but it would. So I thought, okay, I want to write about up-and-coming brands, the next big brands. And then I was thinking, okay, maybe I should narrow it down and just look at a certain part of the world. And as Ping said, my passion is Asia. I've been in Asia for a long time. Then let's look at Asian brands and find the ones that are up-and-coming. Because I didn't want to write a book about existing Asian brands, your clients, which is about, I don't know, Singapore Airlines and Samsung and, I don't know, some Japanese brands and Mandarin Oriental and all of that. I mean, it's kind of, we've read all the stories, right? So I wanted to look at kind of up and coming. But up and coming, what does that even mean, right? And how do you find those kind of brands that are up and coming, right? So I thought, I need people on the ground, right? Because up and coming means the brands are not there yet, they're not maybe known yet. So I need somebody who's in the market who can help me. So I tapped into my network of former clients, former agency colleagues, students, exchange students that came here and then went back to places like India and other places, China, and I said, look, I need you to give me a list of brands that you feel within your country, do some research, that are up and coming. And they did, long lists, okay? And then I kind of narrowed down the list a little bit to see, okay, what I find interesting and appropriate, and they cannot all be fintechs, and because that would be a boring book. So I thought, okay, with this narrowed down group of brands, then let me ask them whether they would be open to collaborate, whether they would be open to answer some questions, whether they would be open to send me some visual materials and all of that so I can put together a book. Some of them didn't answer. Some of them probably never received my email. Some of them said, yes, but we need 6 months. You need 6 months for 10 questions? I mean, only in Japan. And real life experience. And yeah, so I kind of narrowed it down and narrowed it down more, and this funnel became 7 brands. So in the end, I looked at 7 brands from different markets in the region and from different backgrounds and segments. And I spoke to them and I asked them questions, and I asked them about their brand. What was the initial idea? What do they do? And also specifically, what changed? How did you pivot? Did you pivot at all during the pandemic? Because we were right in the middle of it. So it was very fresh for them to share with me. So they did, and then I put this all together. So that's for those of you that are thinking of writing, that's the laziest way of writing a book, right? You just choose a few partners, you send them a questionnaire, you use it verbatim, then you don't have to authorize any kind of statements that you make. You make them send you some pictures, and ta-da, there's a book, right? Yeah, maybe there's a few more things. You need to write an introduction and summary. And in the middle, I also talked about branding and, so you want to build a brand and went through the different steps, but more or less, that's what happened. So I just want to give you an overview for 6 of those 7 brands and some of the learnings. I hope that most of those brands you haven't heard of. Because otherwise they wouldn't be up and coming, right? Otherwise they would be already there. They would be now and not next. And it's not the now big Asian brands, it's the next big Asian brands, right? But who knows? They have the potential, I think, but we'll see. So, and the 7th one, we're going to have on here on stage and ask them a few questions, right? Because what's better than talking about brands is talking with brands. So that's the whole idea. So number 1 is a brand from Thailand called Bath & Bloom. And it was interesting, I thought, to talk to this brand because they were in this typical situation that many brands found themselves in at the beginning of the pandemic. They used to have brick and mortar stores, beautiful kind of Bath & Beyond kind of stores. Did they go bankrupt? There was some problem, right? Yeah. But anyway, so and they were selling beautiful products. They were already looking at having natural products. So there was no chemicals involved, which is already a big trend. We don't need COVID to tell us that. But it was basically beautiful things for your bathroom. It was fragrances and scents for your bathroom, your kitchen, wherever. It was soaps. It was all of those kind of materials, right? And then COVID hit, and Thailand was also hit pretty bad. And then suddenly they needed to think about, okay, what can we do if we don't want our brand to die, right? They cannot come to our physical stores, right? So they went digital, like everybody else, right? So Singapore, for those of you who have traveled here, set up a big program to help brands, especially smaller brands like hawker stalls, to go online and find some kind of platform, maybe have an e-commerce page. How does that even work? How can people pay you and all of that to educate them? That's something that they also did. So far, as expected. But they also did something else. They found out that people started ordering as soon as they could because homes have become so much more important or were so much more important during the pandemic, right? Because you spend so much time in your home. So when you were not baking bread, you were spending time, maybe forgetting about the world by having a bubble bath or something like that, right? So people wanted that. So it was good for them that there was an appreciation for all these kind of personal care products in a way that people were using. But they found out something else. People not just ordered soaps and fragrances and all of that. People also send them emails saying, actually, do you have hand sanitizer? Do you have something that I can use, like those wet cloth sanitizer that I can use to wipe down, if I have to go out, wherever I am, to make sure that, because I'm a little bit concerned whether, I can be infected and all of that. So suddenly there was a demand for a pivot from the brand to introduce products that were not part of their original setup. And very quickly they looked into sourcing and they just completely changed, not 100%, but to a big extent they changed the offer that they had online because that's what people wanted, right? Yes, I want to have a bathroom that smells nice, but I also want to have a hand sanitizer near the door so when my kids come home or the kids go out and and everything, then I want to I want to offer that to them, right? And I may not be able to go to a shop, right? By the way, did you see that YouTube video, Instagram video, whatever it is, where there's this little kid who was born during the pandemic who thinks everything is a hand sanitizer, and she walks around and there's like a I don't know, something like a tap in the wall, or there's a kind of even a socket or something, and tries to somehow squeeze out, which is kind of funny, but it's also kind of sad, right? Because this poor kid has experienced nothing else, right? So hopefully that's going to change. So they needed to pivot and just change what they're offering, what they do as a brand, what they're about as a brand, in order to fulfill a need in the market. So I thought that was interesting. Cars. I'm a big car fan, and obviously the best cars come from Germany. That's what I still think, but it's debatable, right? Everybody's jumping onto the e-mobility bandwagon, which Tesla invented in a way, which wasn't started by Elon Musk, by the way. But everybody's jumping on the bandwagon, but there is more competition in the market, right? And suddenly, you don't have to have a 100-year-old history like Audi, or 110 by now, in order to build cars, especially electric cars, right? So this company is called VinFast. You may have heard of them because they're already kind of big in Vietnam, and they're building e-mobility, right? And they were interesting because for the first time, a huge supplier of e-mobility does not come from the US and does not come from Germany or any of the traditional markets where you would expect the brand to come from. And what they told me, so they're really growing a lot, and they've just built a plant in the US, funny enough. What they told me is, look, we looked at the market, there was a need for e-mobility, but also for affordable e-mobility that was keeping in mind the needs of the market, and therefore we decided to offer something, and we used COVID to think. Because nothing was happening, so we were just looking at our business model and made those kind of tweaks that were necessary to change the way we are building cars, what we are building, who we're building them for, and what will be the future needs of mobility. So just use this time to think. That was an interesting kind of learning that I saw. Kinobi, EduTech. So Benjamin, the one in the middle, is also a former student of mine who had this idea that we need to close the gap between people graduating and kind of finding a job. Because obviously they cannot walk into the employer's office anymore, at least during the time. And so it needs to happen online. But then online is a little bit tougher, right? Because your CV becomes much more important, your cover letter, how do you do it? So how can we help people? How can we set up something that is an app that happens digitally that will give people tools, online tools to write their CV? So not like I used to do on the typewriter in my room, right? And put together the CV, but using an app that gives me a kind of platform, an online tool that reminds me of all of the things I have to keep in mind, which I think is pretty much also a model of the future. They're growing tremendously, especially in markets like Indonesia, where maybe the kind of job-finding literacy is not as high in some other more developed markets, and they're doing really well, because this is the organization that really understands their target group, which is what branding is all about, right? Understanding who is your target, where's your target, and what are their needs. And their needs will be a digital solution to bridge the gap between graduation and finding a job. So I thought that was an interesting way of setting it up right in the middle, slightly before, but also growing in the middle of the pandemic, because they didn't need any kind of physical interaction, right? It was all online, and it's very much here to stay because of the target group and how the target group is living their lives. Curly, super interesting brand from Korea. So Curly was based on the observation that people go to the supermarket and they want to buy something fresh, right? Now more than ever. It needs to be something fresh, but sometimes it's hard to tell. Is it really fresh? Has it been there for a while? And if you know Korean supermarkets, I'm not talking about Hyundai supermarket. I'm talking about Lotte My Super, which I had in my house when I lived in Seoul. Not that great, and not that friendly. So you have to pay more if you want to have that super service that the Koreans can offer. So it's kind of hard. And then the pandemic came, and suddenly people couldn't go to the supermarket anymore. But they still wanted, even more than before, something healthy, something fresh. So Curly came up with this idea to say, look, we source for you from the farms. So you order something, you go on the online platform, you order something in the afternoon. The same day, we will source it from the farm, and I think that's the second interesting insight, we will deliver it by 7 a.m. the next morning. Why? Because when everybody's at home, it's fine, but as soon as people go back to work, you cannot wait, right? Sometimes in your market, if it's like Singapore, you get a delivery window, which is like 9 to 6 p.m. What kind of window is that? That's a wide open door, right? It's kind of, I cannot spend the whole day, waiting for that. So they guarantee in certain areas in Korea, obviously you need to be able to deliver it, but they guarantee that by 7 a.m. it's there. So even if you go to work, you probably won't leave much before 7. So you can still receive it, put it in your fridge, and then go out and do your work. So I thought that was interesting, the kind of digitalization of the supermarket experience, plus having a delivery that suits your time and not their time. Is it sustainable? Yes, it is. Is it ownable as a brand? I was in the Philippines and I was talking to Rico Hizon on CNN, and he asked me that question. He said, cannot anybody go and copy that in a different market? Yes, they could, right? It's very hard to own or to copyright that kind of format, right? But regardless of who's the brand behind it, I really love the idea because it's a very consumer, target group driven idea, and that's why I think Curly is doing great. Has to do with many other things. You have to have the farms, so Singapore would be difficult because the farms are all in Malaysia or Indonesia or somewhere else. But once you have the kind of right setup, this could probably work. Then First Love. First Love is from Indonesia, and anybody from Indonesia? Those of you who come from Indonesia know that Indonesia has a very strong history of baking, right? A long time ago, I did this little Channel News Asia thing looking for Asian brands again. And I was talking to a brand called, I think Holland Bakery. So they had a little windmill, and it has something to do with the colonial history and everything. But they're very big in baking. So there's this brand, and they open up these cafes and all of that in basically in Indonesia. And then they were thinking about, what else should we do with the brand? And suddenly, COVID happened. So people couldn't go to bakeries anymore. They couldn't go to cafes anymore, except for China. So if you don't remember, China, before they had a super strict, nobody can leave the house for 3 months kind of policy, at the beginning, they were more open because they had very low numbers, officially, and everybody else closed down, but they didn't for a while, right? And later it kind of switched, and then everybody opened up, but they took a longer time to open up. So at the time, it was still possible. China was still kind of open. And so they decided, okay, we will pivot, not as far as what do we offer is concerned, not as far as how do we do it, how do we brand ourselves, but where are we doing it? So they offered a number of cafes in the early stages of COVID in China, because it was possible. And it was not possible in the other markets where they operated or what they were looking at, right? So I think internationalization, and I'll come back to that in a minute, could also be one area to look at to see, okay, I'm in this market. That doesn't mean I can only be active in this market, right? Maybe I should look at what other markets are kind of open for what I want to offer, and concentrate on that rather than just because I'm placed somewhere. It doesn't matter anymore, right? So that was first love. Go Pizza. Another one of my former students, Jay Lim, he came to Singapore, Korean, came to Singapore to study, to do an exchange, and he was in my advertising class. Then he went back, and then when I was in Korea, he did an internship with us, and then he decided to start his own brand. And has anybody heard of Go Pizza? It's everywhere. They're doing really well. I saw a thumbs up back there. Was that a Go Pizza thumbs up? Okay. Are you from Korea? Okay. Where are you from? Okay. We have it, right, in Singapore. And so the idea was different. The idea was, okay, why don't I offer pizza and all the different flavors and everything in a different format? Why does pizza have to be round? Because then you cannot have, especially if you go and buy and you want to take it home, and you cannot have a full pizza for yourself, right? You buy a slice, right? And sometimes that's a tiny slice, right? And they charge you $8, right? Da Paolo or somewhere, right? I'm a big fan. Anyway, so he said, why don't we change the size, make it a bit smaller, and make it a bit more appealing to single people who just want to go and buy something for dinner for themselves. We see more single households and all of that. And he set up his first shop with a big oven and started doing pizzas. And then, of course, he went online and he's opened shops. And, of course, he's been on online platforms for a long time, for a few years during the pandemic. But one interesting thing that he said, because I asked him, Jay, do you even need shops? Do you even need restaurants, right? Those kind of mini restaurants where the pizza is made and everything. Can't you just be on delivery platforms and then, Deliveroo or Foodpanda or wherever, they deliver it? And he says, no, because you cannot build, or it's very hard to build the brand on somebody else's platform. Because you have no control, right? People need to experience the brand. People need to smell the cooking pizza, right? People need to, otherwise you're just becoming a kind of any other kind of pizza brand. And people go by, I don't know, price, or they go by proximity or something like that, right? So he said, no. A lot of our business, maybe more than 50%, is happening on delivery platforms, because that's where people go and where people went, and people continue to go to buy their pizza and their other food. But we still need those physical outlets for the brand, to build the brand. So once in a while, people would not just go online, but actually know there's one in Suntec, I think, and some other places. They would know to go there and just have a holistic brand experience, and a brand experience that speaks to all the senses, because that makes us connect, right? And that makes us like a brand and experience a brand and remember a brand, right? Because, for example, smell is super important, right? Because that's how we remember, right? We all have this kind of childhood memory where a certain smell or taste brings back something that our mother used to make, right? So that's what they said, and I thought that was an interesting choice because, obviously he's a millennial, and we would think, oh, millennials, everything's online. But no, he realized it cannot be purely online, because then I don't have a brand, right? I just have a product which is based on somebody else's platform, and people decide, maybe not based on what I want their decisions to be based on. Okay, so some of the learnings, COVID, right? Some of the learnings that those 6 and another brand have created while I was chatting with them, while I was talking to them, just a handful. So first of all, health. Obviously, is a big trend, right? It was a trend before, but it has been supercharged by the pandemic, right? So all brands that have something to do, that have some kind of competency for health, like Bath and Bloom did, right? Can pivot, can offer something, like Curly, right? Something that is healthy, that is fresh and everything, right? They are going to be successful brands in the future because it's something that more and more people are looking for, and is also something that people are prepared to pay for. So I think that's an interesting development that we're seeing right now. Time. How do you use your time as a brand, as a company? And when there's kind of downtimes and difficult times and everything, do you just kind of struggle? Do you just frantically try to move everything online, and or do you just take a moment, not too long, but a moment to kind of sit back like VinFast did and say, okay, let's look at our business model. Let's look at our brand. What has changed, right? Do we need to tweak our brand? Because consumers change all the time, and their preferences also change, right? Not in the big picture, but in small little preferences. What are they looking for? How do they want it delivered? What kind of service are they expecting? And all of that, right? So to take that time and sit back was an experience that some had during that time, right? Delivery, right? Obviously is here to stay, right? I mean, all those platforms were boosted during the pandemic, and they're being fine-tuned, right? So right now we're still seeing some of those huge delivery windows, time windows, but some are already learning, and some are already thinking, okay, maybe I can narrow down that window. Maybe I can ask you, where do you want it? Do you want me to leave it on your doorstep? Do you want me to give it to a neighbor? What are my options? I think Ninja Van does that, right? So slowly, I think we're also seeing a kind of improvement as far as delivery is concerned. So also something that is here to stay. Look at markets that would be open for your client's business, right? That's why it's good to have other agency friends in other markets, because you can recommend to them, we can help you somewhere where we are not, because we have a partner there who understands the local culture, and maybe you would consider a market like, I don't know, Vietnam, a market like Indonesia, huge, or wherever it's suitable for the brand, wherever we think there would be an appetite for the brand to go ahead. And digital, of course, everybody has experienced that digital is a big trend. Everybody has gone digital, but keep in mind that there's also a need to have physical to go together with digital. I hate phygital, terrible word, but that's what it means, right? A bit of both, because the in real life ROL experience can offer something that digital cannot, right? Like speak to a number of senses, and I think that's why when everybody at the beginning of the pandemic said, "Oh, everybody's going to be digital," and that will exclude a few people. Like my mom is complaining in Germany that no doctor's clinic will pick up the phone anymore. You can only go online, which is, if you're 83, difficult. So there is a need for a bit of both, and we need to think about what can different platforms deliver, right? Pardon the pun. As in, what kind of experiences can we deliver, right? In a digital world, in a real world, and maybe sometimes they work together, right? I was just thinking, I was just looking at my bag. It comes from a small Singapore brand called Bind Artisan, and Bind Artisan, they're doing notebooks, individual for you. You choose your paper, you choose your binding, you choose your initials, whatever. They do little leather goods and everything, and that personalization is happening in the shop. So you go to the shop, and there's something going on. It's not just a space where you have products. There's this artisan, who's doing it, who's kind of putting your initials on it or your name, putting the binding together and everything. It's very Instagrammable, and it's also an experience, right? You're not just sitting there and buying something, so you leave the shop with something that is personalized, another big trend, and also something that is an experience that you will remember because it was put together for you while you watched. They didn't say come back 1 week later, while you were there, while you watched, which I think is a very good use of the brick and mortar experience. So while digital is important and they also have a platform in e-commerce, there is a role for brick and mortar. So far, so good. These were my 6 brands. I want to introduce a 7th brand while they're setting up the chairs. And that brand is probably, for a quick chat, probably the most interesting brand in the book, because it's there's a little bit of a taboo to it, and that's always fun, right? And it's from Singapore. It has a focus in Asia, but it's also working in the States. And it's a brand called Bovem. And I would like to introduce, I don't think we're going to stay there long enough to need drinks and all of that, but I would like to introduce the 2 founders. So Leiden and Raymond? Norman? Welcome to the stage. Please. Only Leiden was in my class, so I can be forgiven for forgetting Norman's name. I will never ever forget that. Welcome to the summit, and welcome to our quick chat about your brand. Thank you for working with me in the book. Bovem, people may have some kind of idea what it's all about, but I think you're much better suited than I to tell everybody what the brand does. The one thing I can say is how I introduced the chapter, because the headline of the chapter is, it started with a cut. So what's the story?
Right, so maybe before we begin, can we just get a raise of hands? Who understands or who knows of the term manscaping? Who has heard of the term manscaping? Right. So for those who haven't heard of manscaping, it's not to be confused with mansplaining. So mansplaining is what I'm currently doing, and manscaping is what I did just now. So manscaping is basically grooming of the body parts, your underarms, below the waist, chest, legs, and that's what Bovem is. Yeah.
Okay. And it started with a cut. So what's the story? Why was there a need in the market, in your mind, to come up with a brand like that?
Right, so Bovem actually started with a cut. It was a personal incident which I experienced many years ago while I was trying to groom below the waist with the traditional tools like your scissors and your razors. I accidentally cut myself, and I realized it took too long of a time to groom below the waist, and yes, ouch. And I started thinking to myself, there must be a better way to do this, and I started asking around, and I shared the idea with Norman, and maybe 1-2 years later, he asked me, why not we try starting this e-commerce business around the idea of manscaping and men's grooming. Yeah.
Okay, so there are other brands. So my question is always, how are you different, right? Differentiation is important for brands. There are competitors, maybe not from this part of the world, but from other parts of the world. So maybe Norman, what made you think you'd be successful with a brand like that?
Right. Actually, before that, when I was sharing this story with somebody last week, the person was just asking, I'm wondering what your founder and your co-founder and you talk in your free time. Why is the idea? Why is the conversation of him cutting himself down under even happening in a conversation? So besides that, so when Leiden was doing his initial research, what we found was that there were already other brands, very, very similar brands that were highly successful in Western parts of the world. These are larger companies that were essentially offering the similar tool. But a deeper research will show that none of these brands were retailing, at least in our part of the world, not just in Singapore and basically in the whole of Southeast Asia and pretty much Asia. There was no manscaping tools available in the market. So it just gave an opportunity for some kind of arbitrage. You know, we find a very successful model, a very successful product that's working well in the States, and then we would bring it to Singapore and try to launch a brand. And one of the benefits of our research before we launched was that we realized that, at least in the Western part of the world, this was not viewed so much as a taboo. People were quite open to the conversation, so when we would bring up the topic of manscaping, people in Singapore would giggle, you know, there's a little laugh, at least what we realize. So this would give us the opportunity to at least educate the market. That's the opportunity that was present. So if we are able to educate people and bridge that gap, then that would give us a lot of potential to build this brand around this product.
Okay, so how do you do that? I mean, that's the interesting part, right? Because the whole topic, the whole bigger topic, has gone through a kind of development, right? So first of all, it was not even about manscaping, it was about what product do you use, right? And there was a time when men were just using their girlfriends, wives, partners' products, right? And then I think Old Spice did an interesting campaign, you know, with that the NBA player who said, you know, look at me now, look at you, man, now look back at me. Unfortunately, he is not me, but he could smell like me, right? And by saying, you know, you should have your own rather than so that was the first kind of change that we saw in the market, that we had specific male grooming products. But then when it comes to scaping, it still seems to be a little bit of a taboo in Asia, maybe different in different age groups. So how do you overcome that, and how do you even communicate your brand?
Right. So I think when we first started, there were many brands out there who did men's grooming, and we really wanted to differentiate ourselves from them. We want to move away from the traditional masculine, manly look that a lot of these brands present. So we wanted to go for something more witty, humorous, and we wanted to use humor to appeal to our consumers, right? Because we found that humor was the best way to talk about a very private topic, and that's something that we wanted to do.
Okay, and then well, how do you did it?
Right.
Is it just showing the kind of shaving of the rambutan, you know, which we've seen a million times?
Yeah.
Or, you know, how do you kind of play with it?
Right. So as we said, we wanted to go for something more humorous, and we use platforms like TikTok, for example, and that's where we started getting a lot of traction. We could show very cheeky videos of us shaving rambutans, shaving balloons to show how gentle the shaver is, and we use many of these different fruits, for example, that is only available in Asia, like rambutans, and I think people quickly got very interested and very intrigued by, what's that particular thing that really looks like like balls, right? So people were really intrigued, and that's where we started getting a lot of traction from TikTok, and people started reaching out, and we started growing from there. Yeah.
Okay. So anything happened during COVID, or how did COVID impact on your business, on your plans, on your sales, how you sell, all of that?
Right. So we launched Bovum in September 2020. So that was just right after the peak of the COVID pandemic. So actually, we were not affected by COVID per se, but we were a business born out of COVID, kind of like a COVID baby. So it was because of COVID that we had a lot of time on our hands, because COVID kind of coincided with the longest and the most enjoyable summer break of university, where we had a lot of time to really sit down and work out what we want to do during this period of time. Because it was either watching Netflix every single day at home, or us selling ball shavers instead. So
Okay.
that was what we chose to do instead.
Okay, and people also had time, right?
Yes.
So I would assume that, you know, if you're stuck at home, you have a bit more time to groom yourself rather than if you have to run to the office and, you know. So do you think that also helped the start of the brand?
I think it did, because what we spent quite a bit of time was also to speak with friends and speak with people that we knew, to kind of get an understanding of what their grooming habits were like before we decided, because we were obviously poor university students back then, right? We wouldn't want to dump too much money into starting a brand that we were not convinced would do too well. Yeah.
Okay. So now people have choices, right? You said there are Western brands that are established and that are offering very similar product. I believe you're also going beyond Asia, beyond Singapore, beyond Asia. You know, you can deliver to the States and everything. Still have a warehouse, already have a warehouse there, right? So then how do you keep being differentiated somehow? Because if you're not, people may just make a decision based on price, which is probably not what you want.
Right. So I think first of all, we always try to improve the product. I think product differentiation is also still very important, where we continuously look out for things that we can add on to the trimmer. You know, for example, Wi-Fi. You know, I'm just kidding. Anyway, so we are looking at things where we can improve the product on. And recently we had a new variation to our trimmer. This is our second version, and I think soon after we'll look to see on the different ways where we can further improve this. But I think what we're currently doing is also how we can have a very strong brand identity. You know, even things down to the packaging, the copy, the words, the way we ship out our products is very important for us to maintain that sense of brand identity. So we are more than just a ball shaver brand. We are a consumer lifestyle brand for men, and we want men to feel good when they use our products. And that's the kind of branding that we want to maintain with our customers, and that's what we try to improve on as well.
Okay, and I have a question from the audience, because you talked about you want to do many different things, and you're thinking about your design and your website and your logo and all of that. So who does that for you, right? I think all the independent agencies would be interested to find out, okay, interesting, cool new brand, startup, but you know, are you doing everything in-house? Are you working with an agency or agencies? And what's the status now and also looking forward?
Right. I think kind of the benefit of being a very small brand, at least when we first started, and also the flexibility that we have to operate. We are able to work with many different agencies, so we don't have to do everything in-house per se. In fact, the first round of branding that we did, I engaged my own girlfriend's agency, and they basically did our logo work, and we had a very thorough conversation about how we wanted the brand to appear before we did our first round of branding. So at least we don't need to have a very large size team for our brand to work out. We are able to engage in agency, and even for like, not just in branding, but in performance marketing, for example, we are able to hire in short time spans and test out different agencies and fire them quickly if we have to. Yeah.
Okay. Pivot.
Yeah, pivot, right. Part of my choice of words.
Okay. So our time is almost up, but I have a final question, which is about the way forward. So what's going to happen to your brand, to your product range? I know you're already kind of moving. What's happening now, and what do you see happening in the future? Where will your brand be 5 years, 10 years down the line?
I think right now we are kind of focused on two different aspects. One is market expansion, where we want to go beyond just Singapore and the US. We want to explore different regions as well. I think there are many countries where we haven't touched on, which could be very huge potential markets. So that's number one. And I think the second thing is product expansion. So like I said earlier, beyond just ball shaving, we have introduced facial shaving, nose trimming, and we are planning to introduce more products into our product line to explore the area of men's care and men's grooming. And so that's where we see ourselves maybe in the next 2 to 5 years trying to explore. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Norman and Leiden, and thank you all for your time. That's it.
Thank you.